"Close the gate," he said without looking at her. "And next time, don't pretend you don't know what everyone already knows." She stood there with the iron gate half open, dust on her feet, the driver's shadow still warm on the gravel, and for a moment she thought she might laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was done. In the quiet compound in Lekki, where hibiscus flowers leaned over white walls and the generator hummed like a tired insect, Amina learned that silence could bruise deeper than shouting. She closed the gate slowly, the metal ringing once, then again, and when it finally settled into its lock, the house felt smaller, like it had swallowed its own breath. People liked to say Lekki was loud, that money made noise here, that every house announced itself with cameras and guards and shiny cars. But inside that house, there was a careful quiet. The kind that came from rules. From a man who spoke once and expected the world to arrange itself around his voice. Amina had learned those rules early. When she married Tund, she was 23, fresh from Ibadan, with a degree that sat unused in a drawer and a mother who said, "A good marriage is better than a good job." Tund was older, already established, already respected. People stood when he entered rooms. He had a way of asking questions that were really commands. At first, she mistook that for safety. The house staff learned quickly, too. The cook, Mama Sola, moved like she was always apologizing. The cleaner avoided eye contact. And the driver, Kunnel, spoke only when spoken to, his voice low, his eyes always on the ground. He had been there before Amina arrived, a leftover from Tund's bachelor days, like the framed photos of conferences in London and Dubai that still lined the hallway. Amina fit herself into that house the way water finds cracks. She learned when to speak and when not to. She learned that Tund liked his umla smooth and his soup thick. She learned that he hated questions after 9 at night and loved praise before guests arrived. She learned to smile when his friends joked about women who talked too much. "She's quiet," they would say approvingly. "You trained her well." Tund never corrected them. The first time she noticed the glances between Kunnel and herself, she pretended not to. It started small. A look held half a second too long in the rearview mirror. A quiet "madam" that sounded like it carried something extra. She told herself it was imagination. A decent woman did not notice such things. But loneliness is a patient teacher. Tund traveled often. Abuja, Accra, Johannesburg. When he was home, he brought the office with him, his phone lighting up at odd hours, his attention split even when he sat across from her at the dining table. He would talk about contracts and men with important last names, about how the country was run by fools and survivors. "And what did you do today?" he once asked, not looking up. "I went to see my mother," Amina said. He nodded, still scrolling. "Good." That was the conversation. On those long afternoons when the sun pressed down hard on the compound and the generator coughed awake, Kunnel was there. He drove her to the market, to the tailor, to her mother's flat in Suralere. He waited while she bargained, while she prayed, while she sat quietly and remembered who she had been before marriage turned her into an echo. He never crossed a line. That was the dangerous part. He listened. When she spoke, he heard. When she laughed, he smiled like it mattered. People think betrayal arrives loudly. In truth, it slips in wearing kindness. The first touch was accidental. A hand brushing hers as she stepped out of the car. She pulled back immediately, heart racing, eyes darting toward the gate. Kunnel bowed his head. "I'm sorry, madam." She nodded too quickly. "It's fine." It wasn't fine. But it also wasn't nothing. Weeks passed. Then months. Tund forgot their anniversary. He forgot to ask how her mother's blood pressure was. He forgot to notice when Amina stopped trying to impress him, when her dresses became simpler, when her smiles became fewer. Kunnel noticed everything. It never happened in the house. That was an unspoken rule. It happened in the car, parked under the mango tree at her mother's place. It happened once, then twice, then enough times that guilt turned into routine. Amina told herself stories she knew were thin. That she was lonely. That she deserved to be seen. That it didn't mean anything. She never said she loved Kunnel. She never asked him to promise anything. It was a quiet arrangement built on stolen moments and careful exits. What she didn't know was that silence travels. In Lagos, secrets don't stay secret. They wait. The day it broke open was ordinary. Tund came home early, his mood sharp, his steps heavy on the marble floor. Amina was in the sitting room, folding laundry, the television murmuring to itself. "Call Cunnel," Tund said. Her hands stilled. "Why?" He looked at her then, really looked, and something cold slid into his eyes. "Call him." Cunnel stood in front of them minutes later, cap in hand, shoulders tense. Tund didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He asked questions the way he always did, calmly, as if discussing fuel prices. "How long?" he asked Cunnel. Cunnel said nothing. Tund turned to Amina. "How long?" She felt the room tilt. The air thickened. In that moment, she understood something clearly. This was not a conversation. This was a verdict. "It was a mistake," she said. The words tasted small. Tund laughed softly. "A mistake is forgetting your keys. This is character." He dismissed Cunnel with a wave of his hand. "Leave. We will talk about your employment later." When the gate closed behind the driver, Tund faced his wife fully. "Do you know how stupid you've made me look?" he said. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He leaned closer. "Sorry doesn't fix humiliation." That night, he slept in the guest room. The next morning, he spoke to her as if nothing had happened, his tone polite, distant. By evening, the story had spread. A cousin called. An aunt sent a voice note heavy with disappointment. At a family gathering that weekend, conversations stopped when Amina entered the room. She had been judged without trial. What no one noticed was how Amina listened, how she watched, how she learned. Cunnel was dismissed quietly. No scandal. No severance. Just a locked gate and a phone number that stopped answering. Tund made a show of forgiveness in public, his hand on her shoulder at church, his smile practiced. "Marriage has challenges," he told anyone who asked. "We move forward." At home, he barely spoke to her. When he did, it was with careful cruelty. "You should be grateful I didn't send you back to your father's house," he said one evening, sipping his wine. "Some men would." Amina nodded. She always nodded. Inside her, something settled. Not anger. Not fear. Clarity. She began to pay attention to details she had once ignored. The way Tund locked his study. The way he took calls on the balcony late at night. The way his laughter changed when certain names appeared on his screen. She remembered her unused degree. The contacts she had let fade. The old laptop in the drawer. At night, when the house slept, she opened it. She didn't rush. Revenge, she understood, was like cooking ogbono soup. Too much heat too fast and everything burned. She reached out to an old friend from university, now working with an NGO that tracked financial transparency. She asked questions that sounded like curiosity. She listened more than she spoke. Days turned into weeks. Tund grew comfortable again. He mistook her quiet for defeat. "You're behaving better," he said one morning, adjusting his cufflinks. "I knew you would learn." She smiled. "I'm learning every day." What he didn't know was that Amina had learned long before him. By the time the invitation arrived for Tund's big industry dinner, the one where ministers and journalists would gather, Amina was ready. She chose her dress carefully. Nothing loud. Nothing that asked for attention. She braided her hair simply, the way her mother taught her. In the mirror, she practiced her calm. As they drove to the venue, traffic thick and horns blaring, Tund checked his phone, unaware of how close the walls were closing in. Amina looked ahead, her face serene. He thought he knew her secret. He had no idea she knew his. He had no idea she knew his. The hall was bright with chandeliers and ambition, the kind of place where men laughed too loudly and women measured their smiles. Amina walked beside Tund, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her steps even. She listened to the greetings, the praise, the familiar comments about how lucky he was, how quiet and beautiful his wife looked. "Good evening," she said when spoken to, her voice soft, her eyes steady. Tund basked in it. This was his world. Deals hinted at over small plates of peppered meat, alliances sealed with handshakes and inside jokes. Amina stood slightly behind him, the way a good wife should, absorbing everything. Who greeted whom first? Who avoided whose eyes? Who smiled too long? She noticed the journalist from a popular online platform, the one who had been asking pointed questions about corruption in procurement contracts. She noticed the young woman from the bank, dressed too sharply for a simple dinner, her laugh a little too eager when Tund leaned in to speak to her. She noticed how Tund's phone buzzed twice and how he ignored it, jaw tightening just a fraction. They took their seats. Speeches began. Plates were served. The room hummed with self-importance. At one point, Tund leaned toward her. "You're quiet tonight." She smiled faintly. "I'm listening." He chuckled. "Always the good student." She lowered her eyes, the picture of obedience, while her mind ran through the list she had memorized. Shell companies registered in names that traced back to cousins. Accounts opened and closed too quickly. Emails sent late at night, careful but not careful enough. After the applause died down and people rose to mingle, Amina excused herself politely. "I need some air." "Don't go far," Tund said, already turning back to a group of men. She stepped outside onto the terrace, the city lights stretching below like scattered coins. The night breeze cooled her skin. She stood there for a moment, breathing, feeling the weight of what she was about to do settle into her bones. Her phone vibrated. "Unknown number. Are you ready?" She typed back with steady fingers. "Yes." Inside, the journalist's phone buzzed next. Then another. Then another. Screens lit up across the room, one by one, as links were opened, as documents were scanned, as whispers began to ripple. Tund was mid-sentence when he felt the shift. Conversations faltered. A man frowned at his screen. Another leaned toward a colleague, voice low. "What is this?" someone murmured. Tund glanced around, irritation flashing across his face. He reached for his phone, scrolling, his brow furrowing as he read. Amina watched from the doorway as his confidence wavered, just slightly. She stepped back inside, moving through the crowd until she stood beside him again. "Is everything all right?" she asked quietly. He looked at her, eyes sharp, searching. "Yes." "Just nonsense." But his grip on his phone tightened. The journalist cleared his throat nearby. "Tund, can I ask you something?" Tund forced a smile. "Of course." The question was polite. Too polite. About procurement irregularities. About contracts awarded to companies with no track record. About money that seemed to disappear. "It's all misinformation," Tund said smoothly. "I'll address it formally." Amina felt a strange calm wash over her. This was not the climax. Not yet. This was the beginning of unraveling. They left early. In the car, silence pressed between them. "You spoke to someone," Tund said finally. She turned to him, surprised. "About what?" He studied her face, trying to read something that wasn't there. People don't ask questions like that without prompting. She shrugged lightly. "Maybe people are just curious." He snorted. "Curiosity is dangerous." At home, he went straight to his study, locking the door behind him. Amina changed into a simple house dress and went to the kitchen. Mama Sola looked at her with worried eyes. "Madam, should I prepare something?" "No," Amina said gently. "Thank you." She sat at the dining table alone, listening to the muffled sound of Tund's voice through the wall as he made calls. His tone shifted from confident to irritated to sharp. She ate slowly, tasting each bite. Over the next days, the house filled with tension. Tund slept poorly. He snapped at staff. He paced. Amina remained steady. She woke early. She prayed. She went about her routines as if nothing had changed. But outside, things were moving. Articles appeared online. Carefully worded, well-sourced. Nothing sensational. Just questions. Just documents. Just enough to make people uncomfortable. At church, heads turned. At family gatherings, conversations grew strained. Tund's phone rang constantly. One evening, he threw it onto the couch. "They're trying to destroy me." Amina poured him tea. "Who is they?" He looked at her, something like suspicion flickering. "You wouldn't understand." She handed him the cup. "Try me." He waved her off. "It's business." She nodded, retreating into silence. In that silence, She remembered Kunnel. The way he had been dismissed without a word. The way his life had been appended quietly. She didn't feel guilt anymore. Just distance. A week later, Tund came home pale. "There's an audit," he said flatly. Amina met his gaze. "Is that bad?" "If you don't know, don't ask," he snapped. She lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." He exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. "I need to know if you told anyone anything." She looked up then, meeting his eyes fully for the first time in days. "What would I tell them?" He stared at her, searching for cracks. Finding none. The audit brought men in dark suits to the office. Files were requested. Accounts examined. Tund's name began to appear in conversations he was not part of. At home, he grew colder. "You think you're safe," he said one night, his voice low. "If I fall, you fall with me." Amina's heart beat steadily. "I'm your wife." He laughed without humor. "Exactly." She watched him closely then, noting the fear beneath the bluster. Fear made people careless. She waited. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. Amina was at her mother's flat, helping her sort dried peppers, when her phone rang. "It's time," the voice said. She closed her eyes briefly. "Where?" "The community hall in Suralere. Press conference." She thanked her mother, kissed her cheek, and left. The hall was crowded. Journalists. Activists. Curious onlookers. Amina took a seat at the back, blending in. On the stage, representatives from the NGO spoke calmly, presenting findings, naming names. When Tund's name was mentioned, a murmur swept the room. Amina watched the screens as evidence was laid out, one piece at a time. She watched Tund's face appear in a photo, then another. She watched his carefully built image crack. Her phone buzzed again. "Unknown number. You can speak now, if you want." She stood. The room quieted as she walked toward the front. Some recognized her. Whispers followed. She took the microphone gently. "My name is Amina," she said, her voice clear. "I am Tund's wife." Gasps. Cameras lifted. "I am not here to accuse," she continued. "I am here to confirm." She spoke calmly. About the late-night calls. The locked study. The fear. She did not raise her voice. She did not insult him. She told the truth. When she finished, she stepped back, handing over the microphone. The room erupted. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows. Amina walked out alone, her steps light. Behind her, Tund's world collapsed noisily. She did not look back. The first night after the press conference, Amina slept deeply. No dreams. No sudden waking. The kind of sleep that comes when the body finally believes it is safe. Morning light crept through the curtains, and for the first time in years, she woke without calculating another person's mood. Tund did not come home. By afternoon, the house filled with a restless energy. Phones rang. Mama Sola whispered with the cleaner. Amina moved through the rooms quietly, collecting documents she had prepared long before. Her passport. Her certificates. A small envelope of cash hidden behind old recipe books. She packed slowly, deliberately, leaving behind anything that felt heavy with memory. When Tund finally arrived late that night, his suit rumpled, his face drawn, she was sitting in the living room, a single lamp casting soft light. He stopped when he saw her. For a moment, they stared at each other like strangers. "You did this," he said finally. She nodded once. "I told the truth." "You destroyed me," he snapped, his voice rising. She tilted her head slightly. "You destroyed yourself." He laughed bitterly. "You think you're clever? You think this ends well for you?" She remained seated. "I think it ends honestly." He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "Do you know what people are saying? Do you know what you've done to my name?" She watched him quietly. "Do you know what people said about me?" He stopped, glaring. "You humiliated me first." She stood then, meeting him eye to eye. "You humiliated yourself when you decided I was invisible." Silence fell between them, thick and heavy. "You used me," he said. "You pretended to be weak." I was quiet, she corrected. There's a difference. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he seemed unsure of which words would still work. You think you've won, he said finally. Amina picked up her bag. This was never a competition. She walked past him toward the door. He reached out, stopping inches from her arm, then let it fall. Where will you go? He asked, his voice low. She paused. Somewhere I can breathe. She left. The following days unfolded like a slow storm. News cycles moved quickly, but the damage lingered. Tund was suspended pending investigation. Contracts were frozen. Friends stopped calling. Family members distanced themselves with careful politeness. Amina stayed with her mother for a while. The small flat smelled of palm oil and familiarity. Her mother did not ask many questions. She watched her daughter closely, noticing the way her shoulders sat differently now, the way her eyes no longer flinched. One evening, as they shelled groundnuts together, her mother spoke softly. You look lighter. Amina smiled. I feel lighter. Her phone buzzed occasionally. Messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Some apologetic. Some curious. Some opportunistic. She replied selectively, conserving her energy. Cunnell's name crossed her mind once. She wondered where he was, how his life had shifted. She did not reach out. Some chapters, she understood, were meant to stay closed. Weeks passed. The investigation deepened. More names surfaced. More truths followed. Tund tried to fight back at first, issuing statements, hiring lawyers, blaming rivals. But arrogance, once exposed, rarely rebuilds itself. One afternoon, Amina received a call from a women's legal advocacy group. They thanked her for her courage. Asked if she would consider sharing her experience privately with other women navigating power imbalances. She agreed. Sitting in a modest office in Yaba, speaking to women whose stories echoed pieces of her own, Amina felt something shift again. Not triumph. Purpose. She did not dramatize her story. She spoke plainly. About silence. About patience. About watching instead of reacting. You don't need to shout to be heard, she told them. Sometimes, you just need to wait. At night, when the city quieted and the distant hum of traffic softened, she reflected on how close she had come to disappearing inside someone else's life. How easily it could have ended differently if she had believed she was as small as they made her feel. One evening, her phone rang with a number she recognized but hadn't saved. Tund, she said calmly. There was a pause. I'm leaving the country, he said. At least for a while. I see. I wanted you to know, he added, his tone stripped of its former authority. She considered this. Thank you. Another pause. I didn't know you were capable of this. She smiled faintly. You never asked. The line went dead. Amina stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on. She felt no urge to celebrate. No desire to gloat. Just a quiet satisfaction, like finishing a long journey and finally setting your bag down. She enrolled in a short course, updating her skills. She reconnected with old colleagues. Slowly, carefully, she rebuilt a life that belonged to her. On a warm evening, sitting on the balcony with a cup of tea, she thought about secrets. How people assume the quiet ones have none. How dangerous that assumption can be. Below her, Lagos moved as it always did, chaotic, resilient, alive. Amina breathed deeply, feeling the future stretch open before her, unwritten. The weeks that followed did not bring fireworks. They brought ordinary mornings. The kind she had forgotten how to enjoy. She woke before dawn sometimes, not out of anxiety, but because the city was gentler then. She listened to the call to prayer drifting across rooftops, to radios crackling awake, to the first buses coughing themselves into motion. Freedom, she learned, sounded like that. She rented a small flat not far from her mother's place. Nothing impressive. Just clean walls, good light, and a balcony that caught the evening breeze. When she signed the lease, the agent asked if her husband would be joining her later. No, Amina said simply. The word felt complete. She furnished the flat slowly. A chair first. Then a table. Then curtains she chose because she liked the color, not because someone else approved. Each decision felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that had been stored away for years. People watched her carefully now. Neighbors, distant relatives, even strangers who recognized her from the news. Some greeted her with respect, others with suspicion. A woman who breaks silence makes people uneasy. At a family gathering, an uncle pulled her aside. "You could have handled it privately," he said, lowering his voice. "You embarrassed him." Amina met his gaze calmly. Privacy protected him. Silence protected him. "I needed protection too." He shook his head, muttering something about modern women. She let him. Not everyone disapproved. Her younger cousins watched her with something like awe. One of them whispered once, "I didn't know you could do that." Amina smiled gently. "Neither did I." She continued meeting with the women's group, listening more than she spoke. She learned how many stories sounded like hers. Different cities, different men, same patterns. Control dressed up as care. Silence mistaken for virtue. One afternoon, after a long session, a young woman lingered behind. "How did you know when to act?" she asked. Amina thought for a moment. "When staying quiet started to cost me myself." The investigation into Tun's dealings dragged on, but the world had already moved him to the margins. Invitations stopped. His name became something people mentioned carefully, if at all. Power, she realized, was fragile when it depended on appearances. She ran into him once, months later, at a fuel station on the outskirts of the city. He looked thinner, older. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he nodded stiffly. She nodded back. No words passed between them. None were needed. Driving away, she felt nothing sharp. No anger. No triumph. Just distance. The kind that heals. Life filled itself in quietly. She found work consulting with organizations that needed someone who understood systems from the inside. She was good at it. She noticed details others missed. She knew how arrogance hid mistakes. Money came steadily. Not extravagantly. Enough. On Sundays, she visited her mother. They cooked together. They laughed. Sometimes they sat in companionable silence, listening to old stories that felt new again. "You are not the same girl," her mother said once, not unkindly. Amina smiled. "I know." One evening, as rain drummed softly against her balcony, Amina received a message from a number she didn't recognize. It was Kunal. "I heard what happened. I hope you are well." She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she typed back, "I am. I hope you are too." That was all. She did not ask questions. She did not reopen doors. Some connections were meant to be acknowledged, not revisited. As the year turned, Amina stood on her balcony watching fireworks bloom unevenly across the city skyline. People cheered somewhere below. She held a cup of tea in both hands, the warmth seeping into her palms. She thought about the girl who had once believed obedience was safety. About the woman who learned that silence could be sharpened into a tool. About how carefully she had waited, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Stories often end with celebration. Hers did not. It ended with choice. The choice to speak when it mattered. The choice to walk away without bitterness. The choice to live without shrinking. In the quiet that followed the fireworks, Amina closed her eyes and smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because it was finally hers. And somewhere, in another house, another woman was listening, learning that quiet does not mean weak, and that the most dangerous secrets often belong to the ones no one is watching.